There is a specific kind of curiosity that attaches itself to people who were once everywhere and then simply are not anymore, not because of scandal or professional collapse, but because they chose something different when they could have chosen to stay. Nancy McKeon was one of the most recognizable faces on American television for nearly a decade, a performer whose work reached millions of households every week and whose character became the kind of cultural touchstone that people carry with them for decades. And then, at a moment when most actors would have done everything in their power to sustain what they had built, she stepped away from it and built something else entirely. Now at 61 years old, the full picture of what she chose and what it cost her and what it ultimately produced is considerably more interesting than any tabloid narrative about a forgotten television star could ever accommodate. This is not a story about disappearance. It is a story about decision, and about the kind of life that becomes possible when a person stops treating fame as the primary measure of a life well lived. Nancy McKeon was born on April 4, 1966, in Westbury, New York, according to her documented biography, the younger of two children in a family that introduced both Nancy and her brother Philip to the world of performance and modeling at very early ages. The two siblings grew up working together, appearing in advertising campaigns and navigating the particular rhythms of a childhood spent in casting rooms and under studio lights rather than in the ordinary social environments of their contemporaries. That early partnership between brother and sister would become one of the most important relationships of Nancy's life, a bond shaped by shared experience and mutual understanding that proved more durable than almost anything else the entertainment industry produced around her. The role that changed everything arrived in 1980, when Nancy was 14 years old. She was cast as Jo Polniaczek on The Facts of Life, an NBC sitcom centered on the lives of girls attending the Eastland boarding school, according to documented television history of the series. Jo came from a working-class background in the Bronx, wore a leather jacket, rode a motorcycle, and brought to the show a quality of roughness and authenticity that set her apart from the more conventionally presented characters around her. She was stubborn, intensely loyal, and unwilling to compromise who she was in order to fit comfortably into the privileged world she found herself inhabiting. American audiences, particularly young women who felt themselves similarly out of place in environments that did not seem built for them, recognized something true in that character and responded to it with a specific devotion that sitcom characters occasionally generate when they transcend their scripted function and start to feel like genuine human beings. Nancy remained with the show for 9 seasons and 201 episodes, according to documented records of the series, a span long enough for a fictional character to become genuinely intertwined with a performer's public identity. By the time the series ended in 1988, she was one of the most recognizable faces in American television and had built the kind of sustained audience relationship that most actors spend entire careers trying to develop. But even while she was still appearing as Jo every week, she was making professional choices that made clear she had no intention of allowing that single character to define the full range of what she could do. Throughout the 1980s, alongside her commitment to the facts of life, she was actively pursuing dramatically challenging television movie roles that demonstrated both ambition and seriousness of purpose. In 1986, she played one of the first women to join the Los Angeles County Fire Department in Firefighter, a television film based on actual events, navigating a workplace defined by institutional resistance and physical danger. In 1987, she took on the role of a young woman living with schizophrenia in Strange Voices, a performance that required psychological depth and emotional sensitivity far removed from the physical comedy and warmth of her sitcom work. And in A Cry for Help, the Tracy Thurman story, she played the lead character in a dramatization of a real domestic violence survivor whose case became a landmark legal precedent in American law regarding police responsibility toward domestic violence victims, according to documented accounts of the film and its subject matter. These were not the projects of an actress protecting a comfortable public image. These were the projects of someone who wanted to test herself against material that had genuine social weight, who understood that the credibility she had built with audiences could be used in service of stories that mattered beyond entertainment. Her next significant professional chapter began in 2001 when she joined the cast of The Division as Inspector Jennifer Kowalski, a police drama on the Lifetime network that ran through 2004, according to documented television records. What made her participation in that series particularly notable was that she expanded her role beyond performing in it. She directed several episodes of the show herself, a decision that reflected a genuine creative ambition beyond the work of appearing in front of the camera. She had also written and directed a short film in 1999, according to accounts of her creative work during that period, evidence that her interest in storytelling from the production side had been developing quietly for years before she had an opportunity to exercise it on a larger scale. But the professional developments of those years were unfolding alongside a personal transformation that ultimately shaped everything else. In 1995, During production on the Hallmark television film A Mother's Gift, Nancy met Mark Andrus, a cinematography technician who worked on the camera and electrical side of film production, according to documented accounts of how they met. He was not a public figure. He had no interest in celebrity or in the particular social world that surrounds people who work in front of cameras. He was someone who showed up, did technically demanding work with considerable skill, and existed entirely outside the machinery of fame that Nancy had navigated since childhood. For someone who had spent her entire life under some degree of public observation, the quality of genuine ordinariness that Mark represented appears to have been deeply appealing. They did not rush into anything. Their relationship developed across 8 years before they married in June 2003, according to documented records of their wedding, in a ceremony that made a clear statement about what kind of life Nancy intended to build. Approximately 20 guests attended, according to accounts of the event. There was no red carpet, no media invitation, no publicist-managed narrative constructed around the occasion. It was simply two people getting married in a private setting, surrounded by the people who actually mattered to them. They subsequently moved to a ranch near Austin, Texas, a deliberate geographic and psychological distance from the environment of Los Angeles that had defined the first 3 decades of Nancy's adult life. Their daughter Aurora was born in 2004, followed by their daughter Harlow in 2006, according to documented records of their family, and Nancy devoted the years that followed primarily to raising them in that quieter Texas setting. She was not entirely absent from professional work during those years. In 2009, she appeared in a recurring role on Sunny with a Chance, the Disney Channel series that starred Demi Lovato, playing the character's mother, according to documented television records of the series. It was a small role with a specific kind of resonance for anyone paying attention. The actress who had been one of the defining teenage television presences of the 1980s was now appearing as the mother of one of the defining teenage television presences of the 2000s, a generational bridge that reflected how much time had passed and how naturally the passage of time had been accepted rather than resisted. In 2018, Nancy made a public reappearance that most people who had followed her career did not anticipate. She appeared as a contestant on season 27 of Dancing with the Stars, paired with professional dancer Val Shmerkovsky, a 2-time champion of the competition, according to documented records of that season. She was 52 years old at the time and had spent the preceding 15 years living primarily out of public view in Texas. Dancing with the Stars, unlike any acting role she had taken, required her to stand before a national television audience entirely as herself, without the protective distance of a character or a scripted narrative. It was a more vulnerable form of public exposure than anything her acting career had demanded, and she undertook it with the evident willingness to be genuinely seen. She and Val were eliminated in the 3rd week during the episode themed around most memorable year stories, according to records of that season's eliminations, and she performed a rumba dedicated to her family. Her exit from the competition was graceful and without apparent regret, entirely consistent with how she has navigated transitions throughout her professional life. The following year brought the 2 most painful losses of her personal life within a span of 2 months. Her father, Donald McKeon, died in October 2019, according to accounts of his passing. The loss of a parent carries its own specific weight, the particular finality of losing the person who had been present from before the beginning, who had introduced both Nancy and Philip to the world of performance and watched them grow within it. But 2 months later, in December 2019, Philip McKeon died at the age of 55 after a prolonged illness that the family had kept private, according to documented reports of his death confirmed by family spokesperson Jeff Ballard. Philip was Nancy's only sibling, the person who had shared the entirety of her childhood experience in a way that nobody else could replicate, who had grown up alongside her in casting rooms and advertising shoots, who had later built his own career in television, including a long run as Tommy on the sitcom Alice, and who had remained one of the most constant presences in her life across all the transitions that followed. The closeness of the 2 losses, separated by only weeks, was devastating in a way that resists clean description. Just 1 month before Philip died, on his birthday in November, Nancy had posted an old photograph of the 2 of them on social media accompanied by a message that said, according to accounts of the post, that even though things had been difficult, they would get through it together. A month later, the person she had written those words to was gone. She did not process that grief publicly in the conventional sense of giving extended interviews or making television appearances to discuss her feelings. She expressed it through brief, personal messages on social media, accompanied by old photographs that said more through image than through words. In the years since his death, she has continued to post photographs of Philip on his birthday each November, accompanied by a personal hashtag that has become a consistent annual tribute, a private gesture made visible by the platform but fundamentally personal in its intention. While she was navigating the beginning of that grief in late 2019, she was simultaneously completing work on a Lifetime holiday television movie, You Light Up My Christmas, a reunion project that brought together several cast members from The Facts of Life, including Kim Fields, who served as the film's lead actress and executive producer, according to documented accounts of the production. Fields later shared publicly that Nancy had been dealing with unexpected and serious family difficulty during the filming, to the extent that some of her scenes had to be completed remotely. Despite that, Nancy did not withdraw from the project. She honored her professional commitment while absorbing losses that would have justified stepping away entirely. That detail is not widely known and received little coverage, but it reflects something essential about who she is. In January 2025, Nancy McKeon stepped onto an off-Broadway stage in New York for the first time in her professional life, according to documented accounts of the production, appearing in Pen Pals by Michael Griffo at the theater at St. Clement's. She played Bernie opposite actress Johanna Day as Mags, in a story that follows a 50-year friendship between two women who never meet in person and communicate solely through letters exchanged across the decades of their lives. The thematic coincidence between that story and the losses she had experienced in the preceding years was striking, a play about the endurance of close relationships conducted at a distance, performed by a woman who had spent years maintaining connection to her late brother through small, consistent gestures of memory. The production was received warmly enough that it was extended for a return run in August 2025 at the DR2 Theater, with Nancy returning to reprise her role, this time appearing opposite actress Gail Weiner, according to documented accounts of the extended run. At 61 years old, Nancy McKeon is someone whose life looks very different from the path that her early career suggested was available to her. She was briefly considered for the role of Monica on Friends in 1994, according to accounts that have circulated among people familiar with the casting process of that period, a role that ultimately went to Courtney Cox and became one of the most commercially significant television roles of the following decade. Had that casting gone differently, her name might be associated with a different cultural landmark. But it did not, and the path she actually followed, from Jo Polniaczek to Texas ranching life to off-Broadway theater, has produced something that a decade of Friends episodes never could have, which is the specific kind of piece that belongs to a person who understood early that fame is a tool for building the life you want rather than a destination worth reaching at any cost. She works when she wants to, in projects that mean something to her, on a timeline that answers to her own sense of readiness rather than to the entertainment industry's demand for constant visibility. She lives in a state where nobody is watching for her at premieres or photographing her on morning runs. She grieves privately and honors her losses privately and keeps the people she loves close in the ways that are available to her now that some of them are gone. There is nothing tragic in the picture she presents at 61. There is something considerably more interesting than tragedy, which is a woman who figured out what she actually wanted from the one life she had and then went and lived it, camera or not.